In this video, I'm going to be going over a comprehensive review and guide to Jubilee. So instead of just doing a normal hero review where I'd say what I thought about each card, I'm also going to cover everything that you need to know to play Jubilee. Hence, everything you need to know about Jubilee, a comprehensive review. Let's jump into it. I've played a lot of Jubilee, and she is one of my favorite heroes, but I'm not going to just only talk about the things I like. I promise I'll cover the things that I don't like about her kit as well. I have Magneto sitting here because in addition to beating Ronin on Expert with Jubilee, I faced Magneto on Expert mode in solo with Jubilee, and I beat Magneto with every single aspect. I wanted to make sure that I had a full perspective on Jubilee before I made this review, so I'd put a lot of games on her before making this review. I have probably at least 50 plus games total between on stream and off stream and through my recorded videos of playing Jubilee. So I've got to experience playing her a lot. I'll start off by just talking about her identity. And the reason I have so many of her cards on here is because it didn't make sense to talk about one of these cards without the other. So let's just start. So Jubilee has her alter ego ability says Mallrat, action, search your deck for the shopping spree, player side scheme, and put it into play. So the shopping spree player side scheme says threat cannot be removed from this scheme by heroes or allies, and then as an alter ego action, you get to exhaust your identity and remove one threat from here. And then any player can trigger this ability. And then when defeated, the player who defeated this scheme searches their deck and discard pile for an item card and puts it into play. And you'll also notice that she comes with these two items, the Jubilee's sunglasses and Jubilee's coat. So Jubilee's sunglasses say Jubilee gets +1 attack, and hero response attack. After you play an attack event, exhaust Jubilee's sunglasses and choose an enemy. Deal 1 damage to that enemy for each different resource type used to pay for that event. And then the coat is analogous to that, to where you get +1 thwart, and after you play a thwart event, you exhaust the coat and choose a scheme. Move 1 threat from that scheme for each different resource type used to pay for that event. So following that chain of cards, you can see that Jubilee's alter ego ability searches shopping spree, which then searches these 2 upgrades, which then care about the resource types that you use. So then Jubilee's hero card, the ability on it says to exhaust Jubilee, generate a wild resource. And then you'll notice there's also these 3 double resource cards called Plasmoid Energy. And what's cool about these is they're different types. And not only are they just different types, they have every single combo of the types. So you have one that's a physical and a mental, one that's a physical and an energy, and then another that's an energy and a mental. And this will help a lot with between those and the wild resource on the hero side. You can very easily meet the resource requirements needed for the sunglasses. Another important thing to note is that Jubilee has only 9 hit points, which is very low, and she only has 1 thwart and 1 attack with 2 defense. So typically, you'd like to see like a 2-2-2 stat line from a hero. But Jubilee is lower on that stat line. Granted, your coat and your sunglasses, when they come out, they will give you +1/+1. So eventually, she'll become a 2-2-2. And then you could stack on top of that with like combat training if you wanted to get more attack, or you could upgrade your thwart through different means. But you're not starting out the game with that. So sometimes you can get your coat and your sunglasses on turn 1, but that's not all the time. So she does have a lower stat line than normal. And notably, her recovery is only 3. So not a lot in the base stat way for Jubilee here. Now onto Blinding Flash. This is a 3-cost event that says superpower, hero action, choose X enemies, where X is the number of different resource types used to pay for this event. Stun and confuse each chosen enemy. So you can see this combos very well with Plasmoid Energy and the totally ability to generate a wild resource. So if you use all 3 different types of resources for this, let's say you use energy, mental, and physical, then you can choose 3 different enemies and place a stun and confuse on each of those, meaning you get 6 status cards out. This is incredibly useful for multiplayer and a lot of scenarios where there's a lot of minions out and the multi-villain scenarios, but we'll cover that more later. Firecracker is her attack event. It's a 2-cost event that says hero action, attack, deal 4 damage to an enemy. If you paid for this card using 2 different resource types, stun that enemy. And then, just like how the double resources work, you'll see that Firecracker has 3 copies, and one has a physical, one has a mental, and one has an energy, which help you reach those resource requirements, and then that will trigger with your sunglasses. So if you play Firecracker, you deal 4 damage to an enemy. Almost every single time, I don't think I've ever played Firecracker without meeting the resource requirements. If I didn't want to, unless the enemy is already stunned or like stalwart or whatever that situation was. But we'll go over that again later. It's really easy to get the resource types. Then you'll do 4 damage, stun that enemy, and then your sunglasses can exhaust to deal another 2 damage. So it'll be 6 damage and a stun for this 2-cost event. Now onto Flash of Light. Again, this is analogous to the attack event, where it says remove 3 threat from a scheme. If you paid for this using 2 different resource types, confuse an enemy. So it's going to be 3 thwart, confuse an enemy, and then your coat will allow you to choose a scheme and then remove 2 threat from it because you'll have paid for this with 2 resource types. Now we're on to Wolverine. And since Wolverine doesn't really synergize with the rest of her kit all that well, other than just confusing, I thought I'd just include the analysis part of this here. So Wolverine is very similar to the Aggression Ally. You'll notice they're the same cost, same stat line, and then they both have piercing. It's just the response that's different. So the Aggression Ally that you're all familiar with says after your turn begins, heal 1 damage from Wolverine. And then the Jubilee's Wolverine says after you change to Alter Ego form, heal 3 damage from Wolverine. So the difference here is really interesting. I wanted to figure out which one was better and what the differences were. So I made a little plot here using Python to show how it works. So you'll notice the pink line is the Jubilee ally's thwarting that it does. The green line is the damage that Jubilee's ally does. Blue is the summation of those two. And then red is the output from the Aggression Ally. Now this assumes that things are going well for both of them. So for the Aggression Ally, it's assuming that you can attack for 3, and then you heal 1, and then you attack for 3, and then you have to wait until you get enough health from your healing to attack again, and it's assuming that you never have to block, and you can just keep doing that pattern. And then similarly with the Jubilee's ally, it's assuming that you can attack for 3, thwart 1, likely confuse with your Flash of Light card or Blinding Flash, something of that sort, and then flip down, heal him back up to full, and then flip up and attack again. And then this is how that kind of works out. It's a really interesting pattern that arose. So you'll see that the damage from Jubilee's ally is always going to be equal or slightly, or one attack behind the Aggression Ally. You'll see Jubilee's ally goes from 3 damage, has to wait, and then up to 6, and then stays at 6, and then goes to 9, whereas the Aggression Ally goes 3, 6, waits, 9, waits, 12, waits, 15, waits, etc. So they just kind of ping pong back and forth. The difference here comes from the Jubilee ally's thwarting, because the Jubilee ally can also use that extra heal that you get from flipping down, because you heal 3 in a burst. You can use that time to thwart 1. So that lets you get in, over the course of these 13 thwarts, 6 thwarting across that. So eventually your output will be high. So I thought this chart would be really useful for you, because if you're doing a very quick rush strategy and you're not planning on having the ally out for a long time, you'd see like the Wolverine allies is better for like rush strategies. The Aggression Ally outperforms the Jubilee ally slightly there. But if you're able to keep the ally around for a lot longer, then the Jubilee ally outperforms the Aggression Ally much more as the game goes on. So it was just really interesting to me. So I wanted to share that pattern with you all. And then the pros of this, the Jubilee ally gets to thwart in addition to damage. So you don't just have to do damage, because if you start using thwarting with the Aggression Ally, you're not going to get that heal up as fast so that you can attack again. And then when you really need to with Wolverine, this is something, or with the Jubilee ally, this is something the Aggression Ally can't do. Many times, I think you'll see that in my Magneto videos if you watch it. There was a minion or something that came out, and I just had to get rid of it right then. And Wolverine didn't have enough health to attack. So I was able to just flip down with Jubilee and immediately attack with Wolverine on that same turn. whereas the aggression ally couldn't do that without dying. So that's good. And then the biggest advantage, in my opinion, is that you get a similar output of damage with a little bit of thwart, and then it doesn't lock you into aggression. So with aggression, thwarting is hard to come by, and it really changes the builds that you have open. But any single aspect you choose for Jubilee here, the Wolverine ally is going to be a consistent source of damage if you want to go down that route, which I think is very valuable. And then it's also less likely that you'll need to block with the Wolverine, the Jubilee. I keep mixing this up with the Jubilee ally, and that's because you don't have to play aggression. You can play leadership or you can play justice, and you can control the board like that, and you can safely flip down quite easily in that situation, meaning that you're less likely to just be forced to block with her ally than if she had the analogous aggression ally in her kit. But then there are cons, so it's not like there's nothing annoying about this Wolverine. So you can't heal at all with this Wolverine if you don't flip. So if the main scheme is running out of control and you can't afford to go to Alter Ego, your Wolverine ally just sits there and it's going to have to chump block or die to attack. And then you don't have access to the power of aggression, for instance, to pay for Wolverine, which is a bit sad because 4 cost is really mitigated by getting those double resources. Luckily, Jubilee is really rich, has a lot of money, so it's not that hard to play the Wolverine ally, but that is definitely a downside. And then I didn't write this down as a bullet here, but it's also just kind of annoying. So I see where people are coming from when they say that they don't like this ally, because in the situations where the aggression ally does more output than the hero ally, it's like, what the heck? I wanted the hero ally. It should be better than the analogous aspect ally. And that can be just kind of annoying. And if you don't really like flipping down and you like staying in hero form, it can be kind of annoying. I think Jubilee's kit works really well around the ability, but it's not just like a straight downside, or straight upside. I see where people are coming from that don't really enjoy this ally. But I think this is all that I really have to say about these allies here, because it doesn't really synergize that well with the rest of the kit, except for the printed wild resource on the bottom. So that printed wild, especially with Jubilee's resource requirements, will help you a lot with paying. Will help to meet those resource requirements easier by having that wild resource. But anyways, that's enough of Wolverine and enough of this analysis section. Let's just move on to covering the rest of the cards. I add Multi-Talented in here because this came in her hero pack, and it is so good for her kit. So it says, it's a 3-cost event that says hero action. If you paid for this event using at least 1 physical, deal 2 damage to an enemy. Mental, remove 2 threat from a scheme. Energy, heal 2 damage from your identity. So that's already pretty good. And she has the tools to meet those resource requirements, meaning you'll get full output from that card. So just a 3-cost card that deals 2, thwarts 2, and heals 2 is very powerful. But then since this is an attack and a thwart, you can trigger your sunglasses and your coat off of it. So what's actually going to happen is you play Multi-Talented for 3, you deal 2 to an enemy, remove 2 threat from a scheme, and heal 2 damage from your identity, and then you get to deal another 3 with sunglasses and thwart another 3 with the coat. So it's essentially 5 damage, 5 thwart, and healing 2 that you can spread around, and that's extremely powerful. And I love this card in her deck. It's one of the main reasons I like Jubilee, actually, is just because of how well this card works with her kit and how fun it is to play. Now, Grand Finale. This is perhaps my favorite card for her. It's just so much damage. So it's a 3-cost event that says deal 2 damage to an enemy for each different resource type you use to pay for this card. Choose an enemy and deal 2 damage to it. And that may not sound crazy at first, because like if you think about it, it's like 2 damage and then you get 3 resource types, right? So then it's 6 more damage, bringing it up to 8, which is standard. But there are some really, really cool interactions that you can do here to get over 20, almost 30 damage out of just this one attack event, which I'll go over that in the analysis section, so stay tuned. But it's really fun, really, really fun to me. And the versatility that you get being able to spread around the damage is much better than having it in just one big burst of damage. because you can spread that to whatever enemies you need to, whether it's minions or the villain, whatever you want. It's a lot more versatile than just having a big burst of damage, and it has really cool combos that we'll go over later. Okay, now to analyze the cards, starting with the Alter Ego. So you'll notice I have a very big sad face on her Alter Ego ability, and I'll come back to that. Her Alter Ego ability is inherently linked to Shopping Spree, which you'll notice does not have the victory keyword. So it doesn't go into the victory display when you finish it, it just goes into your discard pile. But her action says search your deck for the Shopping Spree player side scheme and put it into play. And that's why I have that really big sad face there, is because after Shopping Spree is finished, you have to go through your deck to get it again. You can't just search it out of the discard pile, meaning that if Shopping Spree is in your discard pile and you don't have Mutant Education to shuffle it back in, your Alter Ego ability is completely useless, which is really sad because she also wants to flip down. Because there's so many confuses in her kit, you want to flip down to Alter Ego and you don't have that much health. So you can't face tank the villain. So you really want to use that safety to go down to Alter Ego. But after you've got your item out, it's not that there's basically no ability. You don't have much of an incentive to play that. And then on top of that, Shopping Spree, you have to exhaust your identity to remove the threat from here, which you often need to recover if you're flipping down. And on the first turn, you might want to set up. So the way that I normally go about this is I calculate my entire first turn when I get my first hand. And if I need my hero resource, I don't use Shopping Spree. And if I don't need my hero resource to do the same plays, I will exhaust to remove a threat from Shopping Spree so I can finish it easily later. But this is by far my least favorite aspect of her kit. I really like that Shopping Spree can get you your items, but when you can't pull it out of the discard pile, and it can be kind of hard to use, and then your Alter Ego ability can feel really bad for the rest of the game. Because often, like I said earlier, you can get both items on turn one sometimes, because if you draw one, and we'll go over how to finish this with other methods later. But if you finish your Shopping Spree on turn one, and you draw one of your upgrades on turn one, you have both of them out already, which you want to do, but then your Shopping Spree player side scheme is completely useless for the rest of the game unless it's multiplayer. There are some items that you can add in, so like cell phone shipped with her, which is a really cool card that you could search out with it. But the optimal play, I do not think, is to play around Shopping Spree. You should use it, in my opinion, when it's convenient for you to use, but you shouldn't over-prioritize it. And I have this multiplayer is greater than solo, just because you notice it says exhaust your identity, remove one threat from here. Any player can trigger this ability. So in multiplayer, Shopping Spree is guaranteed to be finished every single turn, and it doesn't just have to work for Jubilee. Like you'll most of the time you'll want to use it for Jubilee because her items are so powerful. But I brought Gambit up as an instance here because Gambit has his guild armor, which he really wants. And if you have Shopping Spree out and Gambit doesn't have his guild armor, let's say Jubilee has hers already out, it's really useful for Gambit to just flip down and remove the threat there. And you notice it says threat cannot be removed from this scheme by heroes or allies. Gambit was another really interesting example because Thief Extraordinaire says exhaust Romula Bow and look at the top 2 cards of the counter deck. Discard 1, remove threat from a scheme equal to the number of boost icons. So Gambit can actually finish Shopping Spree with the Alter Ego ability in one turn, which I thought is really cool. And then there are also alternate methods to get rid of it. Jubilee came with Disguise, which says exhaust, Disguise, and your identity to remove 2 threat from a scheme. So if you were to play that turn 1, you could exhaust Jubilee and then finish Shopping Spree that way. But I don't think that that's really how Jubilee wants to ideally finish Shopping Spree. The other ways that work really well is by using the supports that can remove threat. So Surveillance Team allows you to remove threat from Shopping Spree along with B-Cop, and then they can stick around and keep removing threat. So that's one of the main reasons that I love Justice so much for her, is because those awkward turns that you can get where you're like, do I want to use my hero wild resource to play this ally or support or whatever it is, or do I want to exhaust to remove one threat from Shopping Spree, suddenly with Justice you don't have to make that choice because you can just remove the threat anytime with those supports. And there are decks that build around Shopping Spree. So notably, Web Warrior Fanatics deck Rush Hour, I think, is a good example of using Mutant Education to get Shopping Spree. But there's also a lot of other player side schemes in that deck that Jubilee is wanting to use. And then there's a limited number of items. So this isn't my favorite way to play her, is playing on Shopping Spree. I don't completely ignore it, but I just use it only when it's convenient for me. And other than that, I don't prioritize it. It's never my top priority when I'm playing Jubilee to finish Shopping Spree, which makes me really sad, and which is why these two cards, Shopping Spree and Jubilee, well, I wouldn't say Shopping Spree. Shopping Spree is so cool, but her Alter Ego ability is my least favorite part of her entire kit, and her Alter Ego in general, because she doesn't have anything special. She doesn't have like more than average hand size. She doesn't have more than average recovery, and her ability is useless like half the time or more. So yeah, not a fan of her Alter Ego, but I do love how Shopping Spree works, especially in multiplayer. Now on to the hero. There's not all that much to say about this hero card because it's really simple. There's just 1 thwart, 1 attack, 2 defense, which is a low stat line. And her ability lets you generate a wild resource by exhausting. So you can basically switch having a mediocre / lackluster activation into generating a resource, which I really, really like this resource. And I want to go into why. Because there is the argument that her stats are low, and a lot of heroes have a hero ability on top of a good stat line, which I think is true. There's definitely an opportunity cost here to exhausting to generate this resource. But in my experience playing Jubilee, it's enabled a lot of plays that have really changed how the game went for me, and I often prefer having this resource. So I bring up an example hand here, because this is a very standard hand that you could get with Jubilee. You have 2 double resources, which is pretty good, and then 3 cards that are all kind of expensive. So what would you do? If you want to, you can pause the video and think about what you would do with this hand with Jubilee, but I'll go over them now. So the first thing is using her ability lets you play Multitalented and Professor X while choosing Confuse. So for instance, you can play Professor X using Energy and Sunfire. Professor X comes into play, and then if you didn't have your hero ability, you would just have Power of Justice and Multitalented in your hand, and you couldn't afford it. But with Jubilee's ability, you can exhaust, use Power of Justice, and then deal 2, remove 2 threat from the scheme, and heal 2. On top of getting Professor X out with a Confused status card, thwarting 3, and blocking. So that's a crazy turn, and that extra resource allows a lot more output than if she was to just use her basic activation. Another option that you could do is play Multitalented. So for here we could use Power of Justice and Professor X, for instance, to play Multitalented, get all of the effects out of it, and then we have a double in Sunfire. So then we can play Sunfire with that double resource, but Sunfire's ability requires you to spend an energy resource in order to remove the attachment, which if you've played a lot of villains that have really nasty attachments, you really want to get rid of those. And you wouldn't have the money to do that unless Jubilee had her energy resource, or her wild resource here that you can spend as an energy for Sunfire's ability. So that's also a play that you can do that you couldn't do without her ability. And then there's also another option where you could just play Professor X using the Power of Justice, or sorry, not Power in All of Us and the hero resource. That's 3 cost, and then just play Sunfire using energy and hold Multitalented in your hand for next turn if you want to. If you just really need 2 allies, you can do that. And then you could also, this is a little bit more niche of what you do, but you could even use the ready option on Professor X. So you could use Jubilee's resource from her hero and exhaust her, and energy to play Professor X. Then you could use Professor X to ready up Jubilee, And then you could use power in all of us and Jubilee's resource to play Multitalented, and then hold Sunfire in your hand if you want to do that. So there's a lot of options that you can do with Jubilee's resource, and if you build your deck around it and you really think creatively about how to use it, you'll find that there's a lot of plays available to you that would otherwise not be available to you. Because think about how many times you've played a hero and you have a card or two left over in your hand because you just couldn't quite afford everything. Jubilee seldom has to do that because you always have the option of exhausting, generating a resource to play another card, or using your activation like a normal hero if you want to save cards in your hand. And I really, really enjoy that versatility that she has in allowing me to choose whatever play I want with a lot more freedom than I feel on other heroes. So her hero side here, not going to be everyone's favorite card. I personally really like it. It helps you set up really fast because you have a lot of money early on, and it helps you in the mid game by giving you a lot of versatility. Now on to the classes and coat. So I've already covered how they work, how you just, for each resource type, you get extra damage. But one thing that I wanted to point out is that this encourages high cost cards. So suddenly cards like Full Body Charge that are 4 costs for 8 damage, which you may or may not have wanted to do before. If Jubilee does that, she does 8 damage with Full Body Charge. And you can very easily meet the 4 resource types because you can use your doubles, another card, and then spend a wild as well to actually get 4 extra damage out of Jubilee's sunglasses. So Full Body Charge becomes 12 damage, which is almost entirely one-shotting a lot of the lower health villains. Like just attacking one more time, attacking with an ally or two and Full Body Charge, and then a lot of the villains are actually, especially on standard, they're just dead just to one attack event and an ally or two. That's really cool. And having that extra encouragement to play these high cost cards is super fun to me. Another example is Crisis Averted, which has a resource requirement of the mental, which Jubilee can easily reach. And then you can ignore Crisis and remove 6 threat from a scheme. And then on top of that, you'll get to remove another 3 from the coat. So the coat won't go through Crisis, but going 6 threat from their main scheme through Crisis, and then also thwarting 3 off that side scheme that has Crisis is really powerful. So keep your eye out for cards that are expensive that Jubilee can really utilize with her coat and her sunglasses and her high economy to get a big effect out of. And now Blinding Flash. This is a really busy slide, but this is also a very busy card. So we went over how that worked with how many status cards you can place. And if you think about scenarios such as the 4 Horsemen, where there's 4 villains, or Claw, who just spams minions out on you, this card's going to be amazing. When I played against the 4 Horsemen the very first time playing Jubilee, in a 2-player game, I did it off stream. I was able to place 16 Stun and Confuse status cards with Jubilee over the course of the game. And Blinding Flash alone places 6 status cards on these villains, negating so many activations. And it almost trivializes this scenario, because this scenario can be very difficult depending on your player count and if you're playing on expert or not. And Blinding Flash really makes it a lot easier, and it's so cool to me. It's really, really fun placing a Stun and Confuse status card on 3 different villains, and yeah, I like that a lot. And then Claw, yeah, you can just stun and confuse Claw, and the minions flip down, heal up, flip up, and then just take all of them out. And then, yeah, it's super fun. And then in solo, I think it's worth pointing out that Blinding Flash, if you don't have all the targets, you don't need to prioritize getting all 3 types of resources, because if it's just the villain, 3 cost for Stun and Confuse on the villain is not that bad and can actually save you in a lot of situations. So you can just use a regular double resource to pay for it, and then you don't actually lose out on the effect often. And then if there's 1 minion out, it's still a very good card to Stun and Confuse 2 enemies, one of them being the villain. That can be very powerful. The problem with this card, though, as you can imagine, is going to be Stalwart and Steady. So I bring up these scenarios, which also tend to be the harder scenarios. Thanos is just Stalwart, so Blinding Flash does nothing against Thanos. It only affects the minions. Ronin has the weapon, the universal weapon, which attaches to him and gives him stalwart. And if you start getting rid of the weapon, that's a dangerous game to play because the boost effect is to attach the weapon to Ronin, and the encounter card effect is to attach it to Ronin, so you can very easily get it back. And that I don't really like playing around a stun lock against Ronin just because of how bad it feels to get the weapon back and then just ignore your stun and confused status cards on him. And then Magneto, who is the person I've played the most with Jubilee. Well, Magneto and Ronin, I've played the most with Jubilee. And Magneto's obviously not good because he's steady. And then he has the helmet and the armor, which say that he can't be stunned and he can't be confused. So clearly not the best idea to play Blinding Flash against Magneto. But what I like about Magneto is that if you speed run the side schemes and you finish the side schemes before he finishes his main scheme and get physical strain out early so he loses steady, suddenly Blinding Flash is good again until he gets the helmet and the armor. So still not great, but this card I did find a lot of use for, even against Magneto when I was playing in those games. So it's not completely useless against steady. You could actually argue that it's pretty good against steady in the sense that steady villains often have like really bad activations that you want to avoid. And then Blinding Flash can set you up to stun and confuse the villain for real later with your Flash of Light and your Firecracker. So it's not completely useless, but definitely not great against Magneto. Very, very bad against Thanos because he's just always stalwart, and not my recommendation against Ronin. So that's the downside of this. If you really, really hate stalwart and steady villains and you like doing a stun lock, not going to be great for you. But if you don't really like stun locks, then you might like it a lot. And now Firecracker. Firecracker and Flash of Light. They're analogous. So we already went over the damage, the output from them. But there is a small difference between them, which I prefer Flash of Light to Firecracker in many situations. Obviously not for final pushes. The damage at the end of the game is good. But in the mid game when you're trying to control the board and stuff, Flash of Light has a distinct advantage over Firecracker. And that's because Firecracker says deal 4 damage to an enemy if you paid for this card using 2 different resource types, stun that enemy. So if you're to try to use a Firecracker for damage on Thanos, for instance, you're not allowed to stun a different enemy than the one you attacked. So if you want the stun, you can't use it on a stalwart enemy. Well, you can use it, but the stun just won't work. So you'll just do 4 damage, miss out on the stun, which is annoying. But with Flash of Light, you can remove 3 threat from a scheme, and then you just get to confuse an enemy. So against Magneto, often what I would do was use Flash of Light to remove threat from a scheme, and then just confuse the minion. So you can get around steady and stalwart easier with Flash of Light than you can with Firecracker. And then another sad thing about stalwart and steady villains with Firecracker is that Firecracker will pretty much one-shot most minions. So it's 4 damage, of which there's a decent amount of 5 health minions, but even then, if you trigger your sunglasses, you can just get rid of the minion entirely, which is going to be better than stunning it. And then, it can be frustrating that if you're against a stalwart villain that you can't stun them, and then you miss out on your stun even if you attack the minion anyways, because the 4 health and less minions will just die. So I thought that was important to mention. There's not that much to go over with these events, I think, because they're pretty straightforward. It's just output plus a status card. But I do prefer Flash of Light in the mid game and the beginning of the game just because it has a little bit more versatility against one of Jubilee's biggest weaknesses. And now Multitalented. I basically think about this as Jubilee's 16th, 17th, and 18th cards. You can see I just added in Jubilee's card bottom to the bottom there. It's just because it's so good for her. I add it into every deck that I make for her just because it works so well. And then it also is just really fun. So the damage from it is 5 if you do the 2 damage plus your sunglasses, which is enough to defeat nearly every minion you'll run into. There's not that many minions with 5. But then also, it defeats most side schemes because you can remove 5 threat. 5 threat removal is a lot. And then you can ignore minion damage because if Nanny, for instance, attacks you, you take 1 damage. Like, that piles up a little bit, but then as soon as you play Multitalented, all of a sudden you're fine. So you don't have to worry about your HP as much as you'd think you would, just because Multitalented's healing is actually very good. And I wanted to bring up Nanny because you'll notice this is the situation you'll end up in. Of Nanny has 4 health, which is not 3 and it's not 2. So it's kind of annoying. So you'll waste the damage if you do 5 to her. But she also has that tough status card. And then her Naughty Children has 5. It's not as common that you'll get 6. If you have the wild resource and all 3 types, you can get 6 on it. But even with this Nemesis set that's like kind of built to be annoying for Jubilee, it's still not that bad. Because if you just attack, knock the tough status card off, play Multitalented, which you can very easily meet the resource requirements for Multitalented even without using your wild resource, just because she has those doubles and her kit's designed around that. Your Multitalented will just take out Nanny and Naughty Children all at once. So getting Shadow of the Past for Jubilee is one of the cards I was actually hoping for against Magneto when I was fighting him, just because it was so much easier for me to deal with. I mean, in a side team coming out that I can just finish with 1 card than it was dealing with activations from the villain. And that is because of Multitalented, just because of how good it is at controlling side schemes and minions. You can basically wipe the board every time you get it, which feels really good. Okay, and now on to Grand Finale. And I wanted to bring this up because this perfectly illustrates what I was talking about when I said the versatility from this card is really good. So if you're playing against Claw, you could end up in a situation similar to this. Like, you're probably never going to end up in this exact situation, and I'm not sure there's actually 4 weapons runners, but I was just substituting these in for a bunch of low health minions. So in multiplayer, you'll run into situations like this, and if it's just a high minion scenario, think of like Mutagen Formula or like Drang or something, a lot of minions out there. Grand Finale and Sunglasses can actually clear this whole board. So if you play Grand Finale with 3 resources, you can put 2 damage on Weapons Runner. Note this first 2 damage is separate from the other resources. So you get 2 damage, put on Weapons Runner, and then for each resource, choose another one. Since you have 3, you can choose the rest of the Weapons Runners to add 2 damage to. And then you still have your Sunglasses, which will deal 3 damage, right? So then you can place 3 damage onto Melter, and then with your Sunglasses, you have 2 attack. So then you can take out Melter with your basic attack. So just the fact that Grand Finale can get you out of this situation is really fun to me. And I did use Grand Finale to clear all the minions against Magneto multiple times, because there's all those Acolyte minions along with those Sentinels. Grand Finale got me out of a pinch multiple times, just wiping a whole board like this. And in multiplayer, this will come up a lot more often. Now, on to What's a Villain, which is more fun to me. This is the combo I was talking about in Aggression. So the cool thing about this is that each instance of damage is going to be increased. It's not just going, if you increase it by 1, you're not going from 8 damage to 9. You're increasing it from 2 damage to 3 damage each time, which can be a lot. So if you just add in both copies of Aggressive Energy and Warrior Skill and keep up the pressure, this is actually a very consistent combo. So in the best case scenario, you'll get both Aggressive Energies in your hand, and this won't happen that often. If you get really lucky, it'd be really cool. But in that situation, you do 2 damage, and then +2, and +1, and +1 from Keep Up the Pressure, because let's Keep Up the Pressure adds an additional damage. Warrior Skill adds an additional damage. Aggressive Energy adds an additional damage. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 additions of the damage. So you're going to be dealing 4 instances of 6 damage, which is going to be 24 damage, which is crazy. Because 24 damage just from that. And then you get to do your Sunglasses. And when you do your Sunglasses, you get to use Warrior Skill on that again, because your Sunglasses is technically an attack. So you can get 4 more damage. And that's where you get that 28 damage from. Just one event allowing you to build a deck that can do 28 damage just using that one event. That's enough to take out any villain in the game's final side. like 25 on Ronin, easy. That's not an easy matchup. But if everything goes well, you can just one-shot an entire side 3 of even the tanky villains. More often than not, you won't get both aggressive energies in your hand. So it's not going to be that consistent. But even in the situation where you have Keep Up the Pressure out, you have Warrior Skill out, which is very easy to do. You can wait to finish Keep Up the Pressure until you find one copy of aggressive energy. So in that instance, you just leave Keep Up the Pressure at 1 or 2. You can just thwart 2 if you have your cope. It's easy to finish. And then that will actually search out Grand Finale. And then in that situation, you'll get 23 damage from the event. So you get aggressive energy is 1 addition, warrior skill, Keep Up the Pressure, so 3 additions to it. 5, so it's going to be 5 for each instance. There's 4 instances, that's going to be 20 damage. And then I said reliable 23 just because if you don't increase it with warrior skill on your sunglasses, you'll get 3 instead of 4. So with this aggression build, just having these cards in your deck, you can get a reliable 23 damage that is searchable just with adding these cards to your deck. And it's so fun for me. I'm going to go over my deck builds later, but this is one of my favorite things to do in the entire game, which is crazy. And then another thing you can do is if you have Grand Finale in your hand, you could play Grand Finale, use a warrior skill, and then have it do 3 damage for each instance, so 3 times 4 is 12, and then finish Keep Up the Pressure, search it, and then have it do another big burst of damage. So you can play it twice in one turn if you draw into it while you have Keep Up the Pressure out. It's enough to just take out any villain in Standard, and then also in multiplayer you can dish out enough damage to do a final push from basically full health in a 4-player game, just because you're making up the damage for like 3. You're doing like 3 people's worth of damage in one turn when you play Grand Finale and do a final push with Jubilee. Now I'm going to go over 8 different deck builds for Jubilee, 2 for each aspect, 1 for solo play, and 1 for multiplayer. The links to these decks will be in the description of the video if you want to look that up. I think it's important to just go over the aspects and how they interact with her. So I have these 2 lists here. The first one is just my preference for playing in solo, and the second one is my preference for playing in multiplayer. Justice is my favorite to play in solo, followed by leadership, and then aggression and protection. Justice feels like it synergizes with her kit the best out of all the aspects. And when I was playing against Magneto and Ronin in solo, I felt that aggression and protection didn't give me what I needed. So against Magneto, aggression was very difficult because I wasn't able to get that thwarting on his side schemes as easily. So I felt limited in my options when I was faced with that pressure in solo. And protection, when I was fighting against Ronin, it just felt like I don't want to be taking hits at all. So it wasn't my favorite. And I think protection is actually stronger than aggression in solo, but it synergizes the least well with her kit, in my opinion, which is why it's my least favorite. That build that I have in aggression that builds around Grand Finale, which I'll go through a full deck list later, is really fun to me and one of my favorite things to do in the game. It's just that in solo, I find that I need other things. I need more versatility than aggression can offer me in a lot of situations. I need to protect my HP, and I need to keep the main scheme down so I can flip down safely. And aggression doesn't really help me with that. Leadership is just very powerful because leadership is the strongest aspect in the game, and she has a high enough economy to just afford all of the cards that you need for leadership. And I like that strength and versatility that comes in solo. But in multiplayer, my preferences change. Justice is still my favorite because it synergizes the best with her kit. You don't notice a dip in damage actually when you use Justice as opposed to the other aspects. But then aggression moves up a lot. I put aggression and Justice overlaid with each other because I enjoy both of these a lot in multiplayer. I think I still enjoy Justice slightly more than aggression, but aggression is definitely my second favorite. And then leadership goes down a lot because there's not the need to just get that many allies and use that strategy in multiplayer when there's less pressure on you. So the necessity of leadership goes down in multiplayer. And then it doesn't emphasize the key parts of her kit like justice and aggression do. So I prefer to use justice and aggression in multiplayer. And then protection, same thing. I don't really I haven't found great ways or as good of ways to lean into Jubilee's strengths as I can with all of the other aspects. So it stays my least favorite in multiplayer as well. And then talking about power, for solo, the strongest is going to be leadership, just because Uncanny X-Men is so powerful and she has the economy to afford it and get set up really quickly. And then Justice will be the second strongest. And that's just because Justice helps her set up really fast and can control the board, which she really needs to do because of her low health. And then Protection will keep her alive really well. And there's very strong X-Men allies, so thinking of like Nightcrawler, Armor, and Polaris, that can keep her alive exceedingly well with tough status cards. And that gives her the time to where she can use her events more in solo by using protection, because she doesn't have to be spamming an ally every turn against those harder scenarios. And then aggression does have the ability to just completely one-shot a villain, but the versatility is lower than all these other aspects. So in solo, I think it's the weakest one in general. It's going to be it's going to be the strongest against easy scenarios, but against the harder scenarios in the game, I find that aggression is the weakest aspect for her. Because in my Magneto games that I played, I won with all the other aspects very easily, and I struggled with aggression. And then for this multiplayer, I think Justice is the strongest. And you could say it's tied with leadership still, just because Uncanny X-Men is so strong. But you can lean into thwarting for the entire board. So in a 4-player game, when you're playing Justice, no one else has to worry about thwarting for the whole game. And that allows other people to do the leadership strategy. So I think that the way Jubilee synergizes with Justice in multiplayer is going to be very powerful to end not burden the team at all. You're like freeing up your team by playing Justice. Leadership is just still so powerful that I added it up there. And then aggression is going to be output a lot of damage, but I think the control that you lose from not playing Justice is a little less valuable in multiplayer, because in Justice that you can still get giant final push turns by playing that. So like in the multiplayer game I did on stream where I was playing Justice, I was able to thwart for the entire board and then also do over 40 damage on the final push by myself as the Justice player, which I think that's a little more powerful than just doing damage the entire time, but then needing people to make up for your low health and block for you with their allies like aggression would need. And then protection just doesn't lean into her strengths at all. So in multiplayer, if you're just focusing on protecting your HP, that's not going to be as strong as if you utilize the rest of your kit very well, and then just the protection player at the table can do that anyways. So I think protection is the weakest. Now on to general deck building. With basically any deck you make, you want to fix weaknesses while leaning into strengths. So for Jubilee, her weaknesses are her low health, and to mitigate that, you can use allies against Stalwart and Steady, and against non-Stalwart and Steady, you can lean into her status cards. And then Justice will also allow you to flip to Alter Ego, because you don't have to worry about threat on the main scheme as much. So that's how you'd mitigate her low health. And then her other weakness is that she needs to set up to be full strength. So you're going to want to find a way to quickly set up and get what you need onto the board early so that you can be full power for the rest of the game. And her strengths are going to be your sunglasses and her coat. So adding in good targets for the sunglasses and the coat will be important. And she needs to meet her resource requirements on her cards in order to get the full benefit. And then you find efficient uses for your high economy to where you are having a lot of output and a lot of bang for your buck in your deck build. So these cards kind of fill in all of those requirements that I mentioned on the last slide. The X-Jet is all you really need to meet your resource requirements. The one wild resource plus the wild resource she has, and then the way her kit is set up if you have the X-Jet, you'll never have to worry about resource requirements again. And then Multitalented is a very versatile card that's also an amazing target for both the glasses and the coat. And I added Nick Fury just because he leans into her economy and blocking with allies to protect her HP. So he represents that side very well. And then Avengers Mansion is a card that Jubilee can just afford really easily, and not every hero can afford it very easily. And she can get the benefit of that for the whole game. So if you get Avengers Mansion out early in your deck cycle, it'll be worth it. And I have X-Gene under the Avengers Mansion hiding in the corner, because I think that X-Gene, it comes with her kit, and the wild resource generation seems like it will be very valuable for her, but I just really don't like this card. It's like I've never liked this card. I find the restriction on it to be that you have to play an alter ego, and then it will only work for your superpower cards, to be very frustrating to deal with. And it's also, since Multi-Talented is one of the cards that she wants to play the most with her resource requirements, and X-Gene doesn't work for Multi-Talented because it's not a superpower, I just find that it's not worth it. And I've never run into a situation where I have the X-Jet and then I wished I had another wild resource from the X-Gene card. So I recommend just using the X-Jet and ignoring X-Gene. But if you really want to use X-Gene, or you like X-Gene, feel free to include it. I just prefer X-Jet over it by a lot, especially because X-Jet works with all of her cards, like her allies and Multi-Talented, and getting other supports out as well, instead of being as limited as X-Gene is. So now on to the very first build. This is a solo Justice build I did that's built for a non-stalwart / steady villain. So you see these cards boxed in the yellow. The purpose of this box is to say that once you add these cards into your deck, whatever else you add will work. So if you don't want to do something that's exactly like this deck, feel free to change it. I would recommend keeping these cards that I have boxed in yellow, just because I find they work very well for her kit. But you can change out those cards in the box if you want, and also any cards that I add here. So the X-Jet we went over, it just helps her meet her resource requirements very well. And then Forge as an ally will be able to search the X-Jet out early. So Forge will be a blocker for you and also help you get set up. So he's a very good ally for Jubilee. The Mansion is something that Jubilee can just afford really well. The 3 double resources will help you get set up with your cards like the Mansion and the X-Jet and your sunglasses and your coat and your allies. And then once you have the X-Jet out and Jubilee's exhaust, I've never ran into the situation when I build my own deck, at least, to where the strength and genius and energy are feeling like a weakness in my deck. Her precon, I think they would be a weakness because of the way that precon deck is set up. But when you're playing allies and supports, the double resources will be worth it. And then Multi-Talented, it just synergizes extremely well for her. Don't really need to go over that more. And then Jessica Jones is very good because Shopping Spree is out on the table turn 1. So Jessica Jones will have a minimum of 2 thwart, and often villains start with side schemes out. So she can come in on turn 1 with 3 thwart and, for instance, clear the entire side scheme of that Magneto has, which is very useful. So I really like Jessica Jones. And then Nick Fury and Jessica Jones are also from the core box. So I really like recommending core box cards because I know everyone will have them. And then to go with her build, the rest of the build, I have 3 copies of Beat Cop because Jubilee can afford them easier than other heroes can. And then they can clear Shopping Spree for her, and then also just work on controlling threat for the rest of the board. And then if you need to, you can discard it to just defeat a minion. And getting a Beat Cop out on turn 1, and then finishing your Shopping Spree on either turn 1 or turn 2 with that Beat Cop, and getting set up faster is very valuable. And I have Under Surveillance here because Jubilee wants to flip down, but a lot of schemes actually don't have a high enough threshold to where you can feel comfortable flipping down even if the villain's confused. Because oftentimes if you confuse a villain, they flip down, get rid of their confused status card, and you get an advance, the main scheme can just finish anyways. And Under Surveillance offers a lot of protection against that, which I really like for heroes that are wanting to flip down. And then I included a bunch of allies here. So this is a confused build that's built around Float Like a Butterfly. So if you look at Float Like a Butterfly, it says that when a character you control attacks a confused enemy, increase the amount of damage that attack deals to that enemy by 1. So that will combo extremely well with Grand Finale. So on your final push, Grand Finale will get you 3 damage from each of the instances because you're increasing it by 1. So it's going to be 3 times 4 is going to be 12 damage. So 12 damage from your 3 cost events, good. Plus your sunglasses, which is going to be another 3 damage. And since that's an attack, it will also deal +1. So then that's 4 from your sunglasses. So then it gets you up to 16 damage just from Grand Finale and your sunglasses, meaning that you can one-shot most villains with this build. And then Generation X is a side team that you can clear very easily with Jubilee and her allies and using the Beat Cops, which can search out Grand Finale. So it will be a very reliable final push that you have here. And then since Float Like a Butterfly works with when a character you control attacks, that means all of your allies will also be getting that attack. So I leaned into that with Dazzler, who can confuse for Float Like a Butterfly's activation to work, and then attack for 3. Cypher says that after Cypher attacks it and damages a confused enemy, you get to draw a card. And since you have confuses in your kit, and I built in Professor X and Dazzler to all have extra confuses, Cypher can likely draw attack for 2 and draw you a card, which is really good. Chamber says Chamber takes -1 consequential damage after he attacks a confused enemy, which means that Chamber can stick around and keep doing damage. And if they're confused and you have Float Like a Butterfly, it's going to be 3 damage over and over, which is good. Blindfold is just an extremely strong Justice ally for solo. I don't really like her as much in multiplayer just because I find ordering the encounter deck in a 4-player game is just kind of annoying, and you're looking at less encounter cards and more boost cards. So I don't like doing that in multiplayer. But in solo, Blindfold letting you look at the top 5 cards and discarding one, you know, for a villain that only gets 1 boost card and 1 encounter card, you know for 2 turns what your encounter cards are going to be, which lets you plan around that very well. And then Chance Encounter, you can just attach to a side scheme, whether it's Shopping Spree or Generation X, or just a villain side scheme. And then when you defeat an enemy, you can just search whatever ally you need at the time back into your hand. So that's very powerful. And the strategy here with this deck is on turn 1, you want to get an ally and a support. If you get B-Cop, you just finish the Shopping Spree and grab your sunglasses. I say the sunglasses just because in Justice, the sunglasses will be more valuable than the coat in general in solo, because you'll overthwart with the coat in Justice if you're playing in solo. In multiplayer, you could grab the coat and it'd still be good, but in solo, I'd recommend the glasses. And then if the support you get's the X-Jet and the Avengers or the Avengers Mansion, just work on setting up your economy, and then you'll have very good turns later on. And the mid game, just use your allies and multi-talented and your status cards to stay alive and control the board to clear those minions, clear the side schemes. And on the final push, just use Generation X to search Grand Finale, and then you'll get 16 damage out of it with the sunglasses and Grand Finale. And then whatever allies you have, plus Jubilee's attack, can easily get you over 20 damage. Even, I think you could easily do 25 damage in 1 turn with this build if you're set up, because 16 damage just from the 1 event. If you play a Firecracker, that's another 5 damage. So that already brings you to 21. And then your allies are attacking for +1. So Jubilee can attack for 3, and that brings you to 24. And then let's say you have, like, I don't know, Jessica Jones and Chamber out. And you easily get over 25 damage when you're set up like that. So I really like this build. This is kind of what I wished I could have played, because most of my videos I have on my channel, I'm playing against Magneto, which I didn't want to build a confused build against Magneto, just because Magneto's steady and has his helmet and his armor, which can be annoying. But this will work very well against non-steady and stalwart. And if you are playing against steady and stalwart, all you have to do is remove the cards that are built around confused. So you'd remove Chamber, Dazzler, Cypher, and Float Like a Butterfly. Replace them with 4 cards that you like. It could just be different allies you like or events you like. I'd recommend allies probably in solo, and then the deck's still functional. So it's a good skeleton that will work for any build you want. So you can very easily modify this to not be built around the Confused Status card. And then in multiplayer, there's a bit of a shift in focus. So instead of focusing on being able to do everything and being versatile, you want to become the thwarter for the team. So I kept the main package the same, but you'll notice I switched out the double resources for the Power in All of Us just because there's a lot less allies and targets for the doubles, and it will work well with Multitalented. You could keep the double resources, and I think it would still be fine, but I really like the Power in All of Us for this deck because I cut down on the amount of allies in the deck. So the yellow box is the same minus that. But then 3 steps ahead is a very fun event that came in her kit that says for each different resource type you use to pay for this card, choose a scheme and remove 2 threat from it. So I added the Power of Justice to easily meet those resource requirements. So if you pay with 3 different resource types for this, you'll get to remove 6 threat and then remove 3 with your sunglasses, and you can spread that around in instances of 2 threat removal, which will be very good. And then I have Crisis Averted, which can go through the Crisis icon when you pay with a mental, which Jubilee can easily do, and it's very valuable in multiplayer to do that. And then also a 3-cost thwart to combo well with your coat. Chance Encounter can still go grab an ally, and that'll be good, and there's going to be more side schemes in multiplayer. And then the Overwatch will combo very well with things like Crisis Averted, because you can remove 6 with Crisis Averted, and then use Overwatch to remove 6 from a side scheme. So you're getting 12 output out of just Crisis Averted and Overwatch. And if you add your sunglasses into that, that's another 3, so it's going to be 15 thwart off of that one little combo. It's very powerful. And then I also added in 3 side schemes. Lay the Trap is very good for final pushes. The Justice player finishing that in 4-player can do 20 damage, which is often more than the damage share that you need. Build Support will help everyone get set up and you can finish it. And Generation X is really good for final pushes. Spider-Man Peter Parker, the Justice ally, combos really well with these side schemes in multiplayer because his threat removal when he comes into play scales per player. So it removes 3 per player threat from a side scheme, meaning that all of these side schemes that you're adding in, if you play Peter Parker, you can just automatically finish them, which is very powerful. And then if you look at in multiplayer, there'll be a lot of side schemes that the villains have that have 3 per player threat as well. So Peter's really good for that. And then you can recycle him with Chance Encounter. Recording again, going to start from leadership. Since Jubilee has the X-Men trait, the Uncanny X-Men leadership build, which is one of the strongest things you can do in the entire game, is open to her. And I don't think I need to go as in detail for this one as the Justice one, because basically what you do is you include every X-Men ally that you like into the deck. You add in Uncanny X-Men and Utopia, and that's about it. And then you have an extremely powerful deck. And the reason Jubilee is especially good with this is because she has the economy to set up very quickly. So you can get the Uncanny X-Men out, you can get your Avengers Mansion, your X-Jet, and allies, and you can afford them really easily. And then the rest of the game after that is pretty much just play an ally and then do something else. And you'll have the economy to do that, to play 1 to 2 allies and also an event on the same turn. And the other thing is you want to be able to recur your allies here as well. So I added 3 copies of Regroup into this deck just because it has a really fun synergy with Uncanny X-Men, because Uncanny X-Men will reduce the cost to play the allies by 1. So when you have Regroup, if you block with an ally, it'll come back into your hand, so you'll get an extra card in your hand. And then also the Uncanny X-Men will work again to reduce the cost of that. Whereas with Make the Call, you're not technically playing the ally, you're putting it into play, which is different in the rulebook. So you don't get the cost reduction from Uncanny X-Men with Make the Call. But if you don't have Regroup, Make the Call and Regroup, you can swap them out if you want. In multiplayer especially, I would recommend Regroup, because if you read it, it just says, when an ally is defeated by an enemy attack, return it to its owner's hand instead of discarding it. And notice it doesn't say when your ally is defeated. So that means for the entire table, so in a 4-player game, everyone's allies would be returning to their hand, meaning they have an extra resource for that player phase, and they can also play that ally again if they want to, which is really powerful. In solo, in some situations, you might actually want to make the call more so that you can recycle some allies, because the timing can not work out perfect for a regroup all the time. Either of them are really fine though. And then I guess the only other thing to warn about for this deck is that Nick Fury is in the deck. The reason I have Nick Fury in the deck is because you need to find Uncanny X-Men quickly. So I added 3 copies of it. You could cut down on the copies if you want. I just really like consistently getting Uncanny X-Men down on the first turn, which is why I have Uncanny X-Men and build support in the deck. And then if you get Nick Fury on turn 1, the ability to draw 3 cards is going to be very useful and maybe help you find Uncanny X-Men early. And then he doesn't actually mess that much up for the deck. So it says each of your X-Men allies gets +1 hit point, but that doesn't have a condition on it. The only thing that you'll lose by playing Nick Fury is that the X-Men allies cost 1 fewer resource to play. So all you have to do is play Nick Fury last, and then you don't lose out on anything with Uncanny X-Men. And then you can have Nick Fury draw 3 cards or deal 4 damage or thwart 2, which is really strong. Now for solo aggression, I'm going back to this same method here with these boxed cards, because I believe these are really useful for Jubilee. I added Professor X into the box for aggression, whereas he wasn't in the box for justice, just because aggression's problem is that it can lose to thwart sometimes. And Professor X being able to confuse and thwart for 3 is really valuable. So you want to include Professor X in your builds for aggression. And then I threw in some other allies I like. Beak is also good because Beak can get a lot of thwart out for 2 costs. So if you have 2 other X-Men allies out, Beak can come into play and then remove 3 threat from a scheme and then thwart 1. So getting 4 thwart plus an ally that can block for you next turn out of one card is extremely powerful for aggression. And then he also works by himself. So if Beak comes into play and that's the only ally you have, his response says after you play Beak from your hand, remove 1 threat from a scheme for each X-Men ally you control. Whereas after you've played Beak, Beak is an X-Men ally that you control. So he'll still remove 1 threat while he comes in play, just for playing him, even if you don't have other X-Men allies. I really like Magic and Sunfire as well, which they're very fun. The feeling that you get when you play Magic and there's a minion out and you just spend a mental with Jubilee, which is really easy to do, and you don't even defeat the minion. You just shuffle it into the encounter deck, which is much better than defeating it. So you can avoid when defeated effects, also bypass guard, and it's really useful. Sunfire is really good depending on the villain that you're fighting. Villains like Magneto, who have the armor and the helmet, with that response, it's really good to get Sunfire to just get rid of that, which obviously you can't play Sunfire if you're playing a different aspect. And that's one of the most powerful effects that you can get out of aggression is Sunfire's effect when it's good. He's not always going to have a target for it, and when he doesn't have a target, he's still a 2-cast ally with 2 attack, which is fine. That's pretty good. And then because there's so many allies in here, I added Utopia just because you can get a ready out of your ally or out of Jubilee if you want. And then I added 3 copies of Full Body Charge just because it's really fun to have that amount of damage. It'll also open up rush strategies for you against certain villains, where if you have your sunglasses out and Full Body Charge, it's 12 damage just from that one event. And that's enough to just take out a villain's entire side, especially on standard. And then I have Aggressive Energy, Warrior Skill, and Keep Up the Pressure, which is that combo I talked about earlier, where you can just get your Grand Finale to do a crazy amount of damage. It's a ridiculous amount of damage. It's incredibly fun. And then for multiplayer, I don't think you really need to change that much. The only difference here is that I added in Melee. Melee says deal 3 damage to an enemy, and then deal 3 damage to another enemy. So it's 1 attack that's going to deal 3 damage, and then deal 3 damage to another enemy. Notice it doesn't say to make separate attacks. So your aggressive energy and your warrior skill and your keep up the pressure are all going to increase that damage too. So if you have warrior skill out, melee will deal 4 damage and then 4 damage, which is going to be really good, especially in multiplayer when there's more targets. So you can clear a bunch of minions with melee. And then I didn't think that there was really anything that you needed to cut. Multiplayer, especially, you don't have to worry about things being quite as efficient. And I don't think it's bad to just run a 43 card deck in multiplayer, especially. So if you want to cut stuff out, like maybe you don't want as many allies or you don't have all these cards, just throw the melees in and it'll work fine. Now onto protection. So protection, I kept the same boxed cards because they work very well. But then I also added in 2 copies of the Power in All of Us, just because I didn't really want to add anything else from protection in this deck. So having the extra resources for Multitalented and all the basic allies that are in this deck and the supports would be really good. But if you look at the allies I added, protection has some of the best allies in the game that are trait locked to X-Men. So armor is a 2-cost ally that comes in with tough. So armor can block a full attack, thwart one or deal a damage, and then block another attack for 2 cost, which is crazy. And then Polaris, after Polaris enters play, give an X-Men character a tough status card, which that's really good. So 3 costs, you get a tough status card, and an ally that has 2 attack and 3 health. So incredibly powerful. Nightcrawler has a really fun effect to where when an X-Men character would take any amount of damage, you can spend an energy resource, return Nightcrawler to hand to prevent all of that damage. And Jubilee can very easily get an energy resource because of her like totally ability where you just generate a wild, you can choose that to be an energy. And then just infinitely recur Nightcrawler, which is really fun. And then you also have access to Mutant Protectors, which says when an enemy attacks, put an X-Men ally into play from your hand, exhaust it, and declare it the defender of this attack. So when you combine that with Colossus, Polaris, and Armor, who all have a tough status card, they come into play for 1 cost, which is going to be cheaper. So it's not exactly 1 cost. So Mutant Protector costs 1, so 2 cards leave your hand and the ally leaves your hand. So it's essentially 3 cards leaving your hand, but then you get to put in Colossus, who would normally be 4 cards leaving your hand. So it's a cheaper way of playing Colossus. And then also you get to immediately use the tough status card, and then your ally gets to stick around. So if you don't use it on allies with a tough status card, it's basically a 1 cost tough status card because your ally will just die to the attack. But with these tough allies, they get to come in for cheaper and then also survive the attack and you can use them later as well. Triage is useful just because Triage can heal. So I like that ability. And then I added in 2 copies of Energy Barrier and 1 Force Field Generator, just so that you can block damage. Because with Jubilee's Hero Kit and Multitalented, you have enough to take care of the board. You just really need to stay alive. So I leaned into just keeping Jubilee alive with this protection build. And then for multiplayer, it's the same thing, but instead of having those selfish upgrades, I went for adding 3 copies of Med Team because Med Team can support the entire team. And Jubilee can easily afford 3 cost, and just seemed like a really way to adapt this deck from solo to multiplayer. And then another important thing to mention is that Mutant Protectors in multiplayer just says when an enemy attacks, put an X-Men ally into play. So you can use Mutant Protectors to block for the other people at the table as well, and not just yourself. And finally, these are just 8 different decks that I built, but feel free to change them because 1, you might not like the way I built the decks, or 2, you don't have all the cards. So feel free to add in anything that you want. And I didn't mention the Mutant Education plus X-Mansion combo. That's definitely good with Jubilee, and a lot of people like that. I didn't really find it as all that useful when I was playing against Magneto and Expert with her, which is why I didn't include it. But by no means do I think it's bad, especially in multiplayer when there's less pressure and you can flip down easier. It's a fun combo. So if you want to add that into any of these decks, feel free to do that, and then change out whatever cards that you want. Final thing I wanted to do for Jubilee was just cover all of the aspect cards that came in her kit and the modular set. So if you look at Chamber, Chamber takes -1 consequential damage after he attacks a confused enemy. That works really good with confused builds, and you can kind of have the ally stick around and get more than just the 2 activations or 3 activations. Husk says when Husk uses a basic power, spend up to 3 resources. If you spend at least 1 energy, Husk gets +1 to that power for this use. Mental, heal 1 damage from Husk. And physical, ready Husk after this use. And that's not limited to once per phase. So if you have the resources, you can just keep using her over and over again. So for instance, if you spend a mental and a physical, you could do that 2 or 3 times in a turn. I don't know how good I think this card is. I think it's definitely useful, but I haven't decided how to best utilize Husk yet. Disguise says place under any player's control, max 1 per player, exhaust disguise and your identity to remove 2 threat from a scheme. So this works in Alter Ego. Also, it works on Shopping Spree, which I think is why it came in Jubilee's pack. It's really good for characters that have low thwart. So think about like Hulk, who has 0 thwart. It'd be very good to have disguise because then essentially you just have 2 thwart on Hulk. And then the other use is just if you want to do like that kind of Black Widow build where you sit in Alter Ego the whole time, you can use this to keep removing more threat. So there'll be uses for this card. I'm glad it's out here, and notably it's an item, so you can search it with Shopping Spree. Waylay is a 3-cost event. It says hero response attack. After your hero thwarts, deal 4 damage to an enemy, 7 damage instead if that thwart removed the last threat from the scheme. So this opens up, goes with that that build. I think it's called Turn the Tide, the 0-cost justice event that deals damage after you thwart the last off the scheme. This gives another card to that archetype. So if you want to just keep the threat really low, use confused status cards and then get damage out of these justice events that way. That's a really fun build. I have some ideas to use Waylay, but I haven't tried it much yet. 3 Steps Ahead works really well for Jubilee because it has those resource requirements for each different resource type you use to pay for this card. Choose a scheme and remove 2 threat from it. So since it's 3 cost, you can get 6 threat removal, and you can split that up into instances of 2 among schemes as you choose. Generation X is a new side scheme that I really like. Comes in with 3 per player threat and it costs 0. Each X-Men character gets +1 thwart while making a basic thwart against this scheme. So most X-Men characters that would have 2 thwart can just finish this. Also, it's just characters, so it works on allies as well. And when defeated, each player may search their deck and discard power for an identity-specific event and add it to their hand. So this is great for doing a final push, or if you need just to get some thwarting or deal with a minion. It can help you whenever you want it, so you can kind of just put it out on the board and then use it when you need it. Then just an alternate art with Cable for Power of Justice. Sync is a really fun ally. It says, play only if your identity has the X-Men trait, Interrupt. When you use a basic power, Exhaust Sync, you get +1 to that power for this use. So it just empowers your basic abilities infinitely, pretty much, because there's no consequential damage. So you can just keep Sync around and then empower your own abilities, or use the 1 attack and 1 thwart if you want to. And then I think this is going to be really good for characters that have like 3 thwart or 3 attack that want to use that activation a lot. And then Sync can add to that. I think it'd be better with attack. So if you have a high attack character, Sync giving +1 to that attack, and then you just sort of just run the villain over with high attack. Cell Phone says it's an upgrade. That's an item for 2 cost. Uses 3 charge counters. Exhaust Cell Phone, remove 1 charge counter from here, and choose a player. That player makes a basic attack or thwart with a character they control. That character gets +1 thwart and +1 attack for this use. So one of the things about this card is that you can have allies activate out of turn order. So normally allies attacking is not technically labeled an action, so you can't request another player to do that. But when you have Cell Phone, you can like call them up and then have them do that, and they get bonuses to their stats. So that's fun. It feels thematic with Jubilee. And it's another item that Shopping Spree can search out. Multitalented, we covered exhaustively. And then there's this team up card that's pretty fun. It's a 2-cost event, team up between Jubilee and Wolverine. Confuse an enemy and deal 4 damage to a confused enemy. So it's Jubilee confusing the enemy, and then Wolverine dashes in with the claws, which is really fun. I like that. And a 3-cost just leadership event called Mutant Mayhem Alliance. Choose an X-Force ally and an X-Men ally and return them to their owner's hands. Those players play those allies, ignoring their resource costs. What's really cool about this is that it's 2 allies for 3 cost. So you can avoid having an ally die to consequential damage, get more activations out of them. But also, since it goes to their hand and then those players play those allies, you get played from hand effects as well. So an example would be Pixie. When you play Pixie from your hand, you get to grab an X-Men ally from your discard pile. That would actually trigger here, which that's really fun. Especially in multiplayer, I think this will be a very cool card to build around. Then we have a protection event called Serve and Protect. Alliance, when any amount of threat would be placed on the main scheme. Exhaust an X-Force character and an X-Men character, prevent that threat, and give each of those characters a tough status card. I like that a lot. So you get basically a thwart out of them, and then also a tough status card, which will let them block, and then they'll stick around after that as well. And then it's 2 cost, and since you're exhausting an X-Force and an X-Men character, you'll be able to get 2 tough status cards as well for that 2 cost. This is a great card. Now we have X-Gene. This isn't a new card. It's been around. It's just a 1-cost upgrade that says play only if your identity has the mutant trait, max 1 per player. Resource, exhaust X-Gene. Generate a wild resource for an identity-specific event. So this only is going to work for your identity-specific events, which I think I was calling them superpowers earlier, but basically all the events for X-Men are superpowers. But yeah, that was technically not right there. But the thing I don't like about this card is that you have to play an alter ego, and then it only works for your hero-specific events, which is a small fraction of your deck. So the timing of it just often doesn't work for me, and I don't use this card very much. But it does make sense for Jubilee if you want to use it for Jubilee. Grounded is Jubilee's obligation, so now we can get into her Nemesis set in more detail. As an additional cost to change to hero form during your turn, you must spend 2 resources of the same type. So that's not hard for her to do, because your hand size is 5 in hero, right? So when you have 3 cards, you'd get 1 of each resource type, right? And then as soon as you get your 4th card, you're guaranteed 2 resources of the same type. So it's never hard for her to actually get this get these resources that are the same type, just because the math of it works out to where you'll always have them. The only annoying thing is if you have a lot of your resources cards, the Plasmoid energies, because if you have to spend one of those to flip up, that's annoying. But this card, it's definitely bad because you have to spend resources. So I think it's worse than just having to exhaust, but it's not that annoying in my experience. I got this obligation a lot while playing her. And then as a response, after you play a Jubilee event, remove this card from the game. So you have to play one of your Jubilee events before it goes away, so you can't just flip up. So if you were to flip up and then flip back down without playing a Jubilee event first, you'd have to pay the 2 resources of the same type again. Now Nanny is the Nemesis minion. Nanny is a 2 scheme, 1 attack, 4 health minion with toughness. It has a force response after Nanny attacks you if you control 1 or more allies. Search the encounter deck, discard pile, and set a side area for 1 copy of Lost Child and reveal it. So Lost Child is this attachment here. Treat the attached ally as a progressed minion with a blank text box. Attached minion's scheme is equal to the printed thwart, and it does not take consequential damage. When revealed, attached to the ally with the highest cost without Lost Child attached. Attached ally engages its controller, otherwise this card gains search. So they get -1 scheme, but they're turned against you, that kind of sucks. Getting your allies stolen is bad. And then the side scheme says, when revealed, place 1 threat here for each different resource type on cards in your hand. Almost every time, you'll have three types in your hand, so this will have 5 threat on it. And then sometimes you will have a wild as well. Sometimes it can get up to 6 threat. And then the last card in here, and has a crisis icon. The last icon here is this armor. It says attached to the minion with the fewest remaining hit points. Otherwise, this card can surge. Attached minion gets +3 hit points and gains the aerial trait. And then oftentimes this was actually Nanny that got this card when I was playing. And then Nanny just became 7 health, 2 scheme, 2 attack, and had the aerial trait. Yeah, this Nemesis set, it's a little annoying, but it's not that bad. It's not that bad as far as Nemesis sets go. Now Arcade, which is a modular set that comes with Jubilee. And then Arcade is a 2 scheme, 2 attack minion that has the assassin trait and 3 health. Arcade cannot take damage while a trap side scheme is in play. And when revealed, discard cards from the top of the encounter deck until a trap side scheme is discarded and reveal it. So when he's revealed, you'll get one of these trap side schemes, and you'll have to finish all these traps before you can get rid of them. But the problem with these traps is that when you defeat them, bad stuff happens because you walked into his trap. So he's actually, I really like the way he functions. He's kind of difficult to deal with, actually. So the first one here says, welcome to Murder World, hinder 1 per player. When defeated, the player who defeated this side scheme takes 2 damage, and it has a hazard icon. So Arcade will be out attacking you, and you can't get rid of it, Arcade, until you finish this, but then you'll take 2 damage when you finish this. And you want to finish that immediately because it has a hazard icon. And then Arcade's Funhouse is another trap, hinder 1 per player. When defeated, the player who defeated this side scheme is stunned. If they are already stunned, they discard an ally or upgrade that they control. So this interacts with Jubilee in an interesting way with Multitalented. You have to really plan around this because you don't want to get stunned in the middle of your attack. And this has an amplify icon, which can be bad depending on the villain. An elaborate trap is a treachery. When revealed, resolve the when defeated ability on each trap side scheme as if you defeated it. If no abilities were resolved this way, discard cards from the top of the encounter deck until a trap side scheme is discarded and reveal it. So if you're taking care of these early, the elaborate trap will actually bring out another one, and if you aren't dealing with them, you just get the when defeated early. I like that design, and I also like laser sharks there. It's always been really funny to me. And then Hall of Mirrors is a side scheme. Trap. Hinder 1 per player. When defeated, the player defeated this side scheme is confused. If they are already confused, place 2 threat on the main scheme. And it has a crisis icon. So that finishes all her cards. I really like the aspect cards that came with her. I'm especially going to enjoy Mutant Mayhem and Serve and Protect and multiplayer. And then I really like this Generation X side scheme. I like Waylay and 3 Steps Ahead. These allies are fine to me. I want to see if I can figure out a build that works really well for Husk. Chamber, you can just throw into any confused build. Disguise helps out alter ego strategies and low thwart heroes, which is really cool. Cell phone is an interesting item. Sync is an interesting ally. And this team up card is fun. You just get extra copies of X-Gene. And then I really like this Arcade Modular. I'm going to use it more because it's a really fun one. It's hard to deal with, and it can be really annoying, especially for Jubilee, but it's really fun. And then her Nemesis set is not that bad as far as Nemesis set to go, and her Obligation is, I guess, bad because obligations have a tendency to help characters often, like Peter Parker and all the characters with good alter ego abilities that can just flip to alter ego. So her Obligation is bad as far as obligation goes, but it's not. I was kind of happy to see this card in the difficult scenarios that I played her in. So it's like a medium to above average encounter card, I'd say. Yeah, and that finishes all of the cards in Jubilee's kit. And that's it. The Jubilee review is over. I think I've gone over everything that I needed to talk about. If you made it this far, thank you. It was a very long video this time. If you want to take some time to like and subscribe and leave a comment letting me know just how your experience with Jubilee's been and if this video is helpful and any advice or like what you'd want for future guides. And also, I have channel memberships now, and I don't currently have any members. There's no pressure to join if you don't want to, but I encourage people to join. It'd be nice to have a member or two. So until next time, stay zesty. See you in the next one.